Latin America has never seen a guerrilla war like this. The regime of Shining Path is comparable to that of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. That gives the soldiers freedom to do just about anything they want. The question has to be whether democracy can survive. In all its years of conflict and suffering, Latin America has never seen a guerrilla war like this. It's the kind of war in which a young student is tortured and murdered in front of his classmates by left-wing guerrillas. And he is one of many, one of the 80 people who died this past week. It's the kind of conflict which the army knows it cannot win, because the guerrillas are fanatics far more committed than them, and because the guerrillas have unlimited funds from drug running, from supplying the world with millions of dollars worth of cocaine. It's the kind of political crisis which has a beleaguered president, Alan Garcia, making a rare public appearance last weekend at the scene of a battle which left 62 guerrillas dead. Above all, this is a war that has politicians admitting they're in trouble and out of touch with their people.
I think it's very serious, and it's especially serious under these economic and social and financial circumstances. I have the impression that the political parties have not been able to interpret the feelings of a great percentage of the population.
That great majority is Indian. It was Che Guevara who first preached the idea of liberating Latin America with the Indians and for the Indians. Sendero Luminoso, the Shining Path movement, has succeeded in some ways where he failed. They're ruthless, they're dogmatic, and they're almost invisible. Their leader, Abimael Guzman, a university professor who went underground 10 years ago, casts himself as the fourth in line behind Marx, Lenin, and Chairman Mao. He calls himself President, Presidente Gonzalo. The hallmark of his Shining Path has been brutality, and their systematic approach to the destruction of Peruvian society. They murder soldiers, policemen, politicians, and ordinary people who get in their way. They blow up bridges, roads, they cut power supplies in the major cities, in the name of a peasant revolution designed to overthrow feudal landlords.
What I think is Shining Path is creating the conditions for a civil war in Peru.
Jose Gonzalez, the one Peruvian journalist who's lived and worked with Shining Path.
There's a basic principle for Shining Path. Shining Path says the state, the government, builds to destroy. And Shining Path says we destroy to build.
The Upper Huallaga Valley in northern Peru. This is the largest single source of cocaine and crack anywhere. Half the world's supply comes from here. And today, in a so-called liberated zone, it's grown and picked by peasants who live under the rule of Shining Path. The guerrillas take a percentage of every shipment. That's millions of dollars a month. In a very real sense, then, the cocaine addicts of America and Europe are financing their war. The Peruvian army does have some help from the United States, but they openly acknowledge that this is a red zone under the control of the communist guerrillas. Indeed, everything suggests that this is a homegrown revolution, rooted in centuries of oppression and racism. This is the village of Chupaca in central Peru. For generations, these Indians of the Andes have reared the cattle and grown the crops that feeds the rest of the country. Their labour's always been cheap. They've received precious little from any government, civilian or military. They form 2/3 of the nation, yet they've never really had a voice. Here, Shining Path is not a headline in the local paper. It's a way of life. By day, the army patrols villages like this. A few months ago, a state of emergency was declared, and that gives the soldiers freedom to do just about anything they want. Their justice is summary and arbitrary. Increasingly, as the guerrillas have moved into this area, the army's tactics have become extreme. In the past few months, there have been persistent allegations of intimidation and torture. It shows that the army believes there's only one way to fight this conflict, and that's no holds barred. Like any guerrilla war, this is an army which feels it's on the defensive, dealing with an enemy it can't see or identify.
Ustedes, o sea, no tienen un uniforme, no dicen,
They don't have a uniform. They don't have identification on their sleeves. They use babies to carry bombs.
By night, it's a very different picture in a place like this. The army is back in barracks, then the guerrillas move in. One form of coercion is replaced by another. You know Shining Path's been here from the writing on the walls, even on the church, which has no immunity in this war. In this area, the guerrillas have one clear aim: to make the peasants stop working for others, to grow only enough food for themselves, ultimately to starve the centres of power, specifically Lima, the capital. Those who've watched all this firsthand say that the regime of Shining Path is comparable to that of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia.
Everybody that won't accept the rules would be killed. That's it. It will be killed. They have strong rules. They have 9 principles and what they call 3 gold rules. Between that kind of rules, not to steal, not to lie, not to, you have to have one wife, for example. If you have 2 women, you have to choose one of them. And if you don't accept that, if you have a second fail on that principle, you will be killed, for example.
Ruthless or not, Shining Path has found sympathizers, and it is building a network that is getting closer and closer to Lima. This, for example, is the mine at Casapalca, less than 100 miles from the capital. Here there have been strikes, work to rules, and union leaders who disagreed with Shining Path have been executed. The mines produce half of Peru's income. They lost $70 million last year because of sabotage. Once again, an impoverished Indian community has been politicized, and the military has no identifiable enemy except the masses of ordinary people. It's only been in the past few months that the ruling class in this country has really woken up to the threat. The army in particular now recognizes that it has a classic guerrilla war in its hands, moving from the countryside to the key industries like the mines and to the cities. In a society like this, the question has to be whether democracy can survive. Peru was the first of the Latin American countries to restore democracy in the 1980s after years of military rule. What happens here then, and whether the army does make a move, is being watched all around the region. Because if the explosive combination of drugs and guerrillas brings a coup, then any number of democracies in Latin America are vulnerable. The politicians of this country showed little stomach for the fight, though. The day we visited Parliament, they were supposed to be debating terrorism. It took all day to get a quorum. And then the session was suspended when Shining Path shot dead an MP just outside Lima. When we spoke to the Prime Minister, he insisted that there was the political will for the campaign against the guerrillas.
La lucha contra el terrorismo y contra el narcotráfico es una sola.
The fight against terrorism and drugs is one and the same thing. So I say we can argue about everything else, but we have to unite on this one and keep the army and police with us.
En el campo militar y en el campo policial.
Would you accept that the longer this goes on, the greater the chance of a military coup?
No. Yo le puedo decir que con los militares estamos.
We are working, I can assure you, we are working perfectly in harmony with the military. The generals of today are not the generals of yesterday. The military today knows its place under the Constitution and under our political control.
Unidos y bajo la dirección del poder político.
The army in Latin America has rarely known its place, and as this war moves closer and closer to Lima, there's deep unease in the military about the politicians. There is a belief, however, that the generals will wait for elections next year. If so, Shining Path is going to have a major say. Already they have their own newspaper printed secretly in the capital, and their message will be sabotage the poll. Here they talk openly about the day they run the country, even though that might be decades away.
El presidente señala de que todo depende de nosotros.
The leader says it all depends on us, how soon we take power. Us, the revolutionaries in the popular war. But he believes that it'll take about 50 to 100 years.
That newspaper is distributed, and it is widely read. Hardly surprising then that at the oldest university in all of the Americas, San Marcos in Lima, there is a stronghold of the Shining Path, a network of students who are said to act as the eyes and ears for the guerrillas in the capital. Last week, more than 500 of them were arrested, and a huge arms cache was discovered here. Far from being a battle for control of the countryside then, the lines of confrontation between the army and the guerrillas is now being drawn in the center of Lima.
The danger for Peruvian democracy is that we may not be able, for example, to have elections next year, not because the government doesn't want it, not because the army doesn't want it, but because there will be no candidates. If you're living in a small hamlet in the Andes, where they've killed 3 or 4 mayors in succession, and Sendero Luminoso comes in and says nobody's going to be a candidate this year, who the hell is going to be a candidate? Sendero wants, this is in black and white, this is not, I'm not inventing this, Sendero wants to provoke a military coup.
Up in the mountains, despite the killings and almost daily funerals, there are those who remember what the army did the last time they took power, and ask themselves now whether they wouldn't be better off under the guerrillas, however brutal they may be. The fact that Shining Path has got this far is an indictment of the way this country has been run for decades, of soldiers and politicians who've abused power. It is the final proof, perhaps, that these people don't believe in the kind of democracy they've seen. More than that, they're so desperate that they'll consider almost any alternative. David Smith, ITN, Huancayo, Peru.